The day I was supposed to walk my daughter down the aisle, I discovered she wasn't my daughter at all. Neither were the other two. And the man who stole my family? He was my best friend. But I didn't get angry. I got precise. Golden chandeliers bathed the grand ballroom of the luxurious Astoria Regent Hotel in warm, opulent light. The glow danced across the marble floors, reflecting off the silver accents stitched into Dr. Elias Monroe's custom-tailored navy suit. At 52, Elias carried the poise and presence of a man revered in his profession. As the chief cardiac surgeon at a prominent New York medical center, his steady hands had saved countless lives. But this evening was not about medicine or accolades. It was a celebration, the pre-wedding reception of his eldest daughter, Isla. He stood near the ballroom's center, scanning the scene with quiet pride. Every floral arrangement of ivory orchids and dusty pink roses had been handpicked. The seven-figure wedding budget, a culmination of decades of careful saving, was on full display. Guests included top-tier hospital board members, legal elites, and socialites dressed in designer couture. The atmosphere buzzed with soft music and laughter. Elias accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. Across the room, his wife Vivian Hale glided between conversations, graceful in a deep burgundy gown. At 48, her golden hair was styled in sleek waves, and her social finesse hadn't dimmed over the years. Their younger children, Delaney and Nolan, were holding court in separate corners. Delaney, 23, passionately recounting a clinical rotation at Columbia Med. Nolan, 19, back from Stanford, surrounded by admiring peers. "Dad," came a familiar voice. Isla approached in a snow-white cocktail dress, her diamond ring catching the light. The quartet had taken a break, and she wanted to cue the DJ. Elias checked his watch, a timepiece gifted by a former patient. Perfect timing, he thought, nodding in approval. Isla beamed, straightening her father's tie, glowing with anticipation for her big day. As guests mingled, Elias noticed the absence of one person, Dominic Kellen, his best friend of 25 years and a fellow physician. Dominic had always been theatrical, often arriving fashionably late, but he never missed family events. Moments later, the grand doors swung open, and in swept Dominic. At 54, he was as flamboyant as ever, his dark curls expertly styled, his suit impeccable. His signature charm sparked brief applause from some guests. Elias welcomed him warmly. Vivian greeted Dominic with practiced elegance, offering air kisses and compliments. Dominic's hand lingered a second too long on her waist. Elias took note, not with suspicion, but with that clinical awareness only a surgeon possesses. Past. The father of the groom, Harrison Whitmore, called for attention. A well-respected attorney, Harrison gave a heartfelt toast about family, legacy, and the joy of uniting two exceptional young people. Elias stood beside Isla, hand gently resting on her shoulder. Yet as Harrison spoke of values and trust, Elias noticed a silent exchange. A fleeting look between Vivian and Dominic, a glance too familiar, a hand twitch half-restrained. Something unspoken, but loud to those who knew what to look for. Excusing himself under the pretense of reviewing final logistics for the ceremony, Elias walked into a quieter wing of the hotel. He checked a message from the wedding coordinator, confirming morning deliveries. But just as he was about to return to the celebration, he caught the low murmur of voices from an adjacent hallway alcove. He paused. What he heard shattered decades of certainty. Vivian's voice. $1 million event. Elias really outdid himself. Dominic's reply. He's always had a taste for extravagance. Remember when we convinced him the procedure worked? That was your masterpiece. Then laughter. Soft, intimate, complicit. Isla's voice joined in. Cold, detached. At least biological dad will be walking me down the aisle tomorrow too. Mara added. We all have Dominic's eyes. Elias never questioned a thing. Vivian. He sees only what he wants. Always did. Payments disguised as mentoring programs. DNA links hidden behind medical screens. Decades of deceit. Elias didn't move. didn't speak. The same calm he used in the operating room took over. He returned to the business lounge, opened his laptop, and began pulling financial records, cross-referencing transactions. Mentoring payments from Dominic to all 3 children since birth. Academic grants that matched their tuition to the cent. He made 3 calls, his attorney, his private investigator, and his banker in Zurich. The puzzle was no longer pieces. It was a finished portrait, one of betrayal, precision, and strategy. Back in their suite, Vivian was in bed, smiling up from her phone. Elias returned her smile with one of his own. Everything was ready. Tomorrow would still mark a new beginning. Just not the one anyone expected. The sky over Manhattan was still cloaked in darkness when Elias Monroe stepped out of the elevator into the executive business center of the Astoria Regent. Clad in his tailored morning suit, he exuded the same composed authority that once steadied an entire cardiac team mid-crisis. The hotel halls were silent, save for the faint clinking of breakfast trays being prepared several floors below. By 6 a.m., every file, document, and photograph had been sorted into labeled digital folders. DNA test results, transaction histories, private surveillance footage, the entire architecture of deception was laid bare. It had been a long night of revelations, but Elias was no stranger to working through the dark. He reviewed the final asset transfer notifications from his Zurich bank. His decision to establish dual citizenship in Switzerland years ago, once considered excessive caution, had now proven a masterstroke. Every property, every account, every legacy fund had been moved. His personal estate, once shared with Vivian and the children, was now securely in his name alone. At precisely 6:45, Elias issued the scheduled message to the cathedral's coordinator, Leona Reyes. She would find printed notices affixed to the massive oak doors of St. Aurelius Cathedral, informing all guests that the ceremony had been cancelled. The reasons, he decided, would be evident soon enough. By 7:15, as the sun began casting golden slivers over the city, the first guests arrived, dressed in their finest attire, eager for the wedding of the year. What they encountered instead was a line of ushers handing out small ivory boxes. Nestled inside each, a USB drive and a single-page letter. The letter, written in Elias's unmistakable hand, was direct and composed. It explained that due to revelations of profound personal and ethical betrayal, the wedding had been called off. The USB contained files, DNA reports, medical documentation, surveillance logs, and financial statements, all curated with the meticulous eye of a surgeon. Reaction rippled like a slow-moving earthquake. Some guests gasped openly. Others wandered off to the cathedral steps to sit in silence, heads buried in their hands. A few, mostly hospital board members, began reviewing the files with grim expressions, connecting names and violations they could no longer ignore. In the Whitmore family car, Asher read through the materials in stunned silence. They all knew, he muttered to himself. Sienna, Vivian, all of them. His father, Harrison, looked pale, his fingers trembling as he clutched the paper. Evelyn Whitmore sat beside him, stunned speechless for the first time in years. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Vivian stirred awake to the sound of dozens of text notifications. Her phone screen lit up with messages ranging from stunned curiosity to outright horror. She leapt from bed and, realizing the time, dragged on a robe and heels. Dominic, roused by the commotion, followed without question. They arrived at the cathedral just before 8 o'clock, disheveled and breathless. Vivian demanded answers, her voice rising as she approached Leona. Where is Elias? What has he done? Leona's face betrayed only faint disdain. Dr. Monroe is in the sacristy. He's been here since before dawn. Inside, Elias stood alone in a small antechamber, sorting legal papers on a side table. His demeanor was calm, almost clinical. When Vivian burst in, her expression a storm of fury and confusion, he looked up without surprise. You've humiliated us, she hissed. Elias replied evenly, interesting choice of words. Not why, not how could you, but humiliation. Always the image with you, Vivian. Dominic tried to interject, but Elias cut him off with a cold smile. Save it. The documents explain everything. You're their father. I'm just the man who paid for their lies. He handed over a thick envelope. Divorce papers. Trust funds reassigned. Custodial rights relinquished. Clauses enforced with brutal clarity. Vivian paled as she read the terms. You can't do this. You transferred everything. The benefits of Swiss jurisdiction, Elias replied smoothly. I learned a few things while treating the Minister of Health in Geneva, and noticed a few inconsistencies in Nolan's blood work last year. Just enough to start asking the right questions. Dominic's bravado evaporated. You'll ruin everything. Your career. The children's futures. No, Elias said. I'm preserving integrity. Something you clearly never valued. The sacristy door opened again. Grayson Wells, Elias's longtime attorney, entered with 2 additional figures. Naomi Kerr, the private investigator, and Camille Rhodes, legal counsel for the hospital board. Vivian flinched. Dominic turned visibly gray. We'll need signatures, Grayson said. And we strongly advise you to cooperate. Press will be here soon. Outside, the whispers grew louder. Word had spread quickly. Wedding guests were now huddling in groups, reviewing files on their phones. The story was out. The betrayal, the fraud, the deceit. All of it laid bare. Isla arrived in her gown, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Mara and Nolan trailed behind, each silent and shaken. They'd left their dressing suites in a panic, bombarded by calls and texts. The damage had already been done. Elias faced them without anger. I believe you made it clear last night that I'm not your father, so I suppose my presence here was never truly required. The room fell silent, punctuated only by the clicking of camera shutters outside. And yet, inside Elias Monroe's mind, there was only one sound. Clarity. The echoes of betrayal didn't end at the cathedral steps. By midday, the news had swept through Manhattan's social and medical circles like a firestorm. The canceled wedding had become more than gossip. It was a scandal that exposed decades of deception within one of the city's most respected families. By the time the guests returned home, local and national media outlets had begun reporting on the explosive documents distributed at St. Aurelius. Medical board members, legal associations, and insurance investigators were already in motion. Elias Monroe's calculated release of evidence had triggered formal inquiries into Dominic Kellen's medical ethics, Vivian Hale's role in falsifying post-operative reports, and the financial web that linked both of them to Elias's children. The reaction was swift. Hospital administrators called emergency meetings. Donors pulled back pledges. Invitations to charity events were withdrawn. News anchors debated how one man's meticulous revenge had upended not just a wedding, but reputations built over a quarter-century. That evening, in a small apartment in Queens, Vivian and Dominic argued over their next steps. Their penthouse had already been legally reassigned. The cars, accounts, and art were gone. Even Vivian's prized jewelry had been moved to a secure vault in Zurich. Dominic paced like a caged animal, muttering about lawyers and reputation management firms. You told me the records were foolproof, Vivian snapped. You told me he'd never question it, Dominic hissed back. Their voices bounced off the bare walls. No more soundproofed luxury, just reality. Across town, Sienna Monroe sat alone in a hotel room provided by the Whitmore family, trying to reach Asher. Her calls went unanswered. Texts returned undelivered. Earlier that day, Harrison Whitmore had made a statement to the press, confirming the engagement was permanently dissolved and praising Elias Monroe for his moral courage. Sienna's world, once assured and glittering, had collapsed into silence. Mara tried damage control via social media. She posted tearful videos, accusing Elias of being cold, controlling, and abusive. But within hours, dozens of former patients, colleagues, and even nurses had flooded the comments with personal stories of Elias's compassion, generosity, and integrity. Her campaign had backfired catastrophically. Nolan faced worse. At Stanford, news of the scandal reached the administration within 24 hours. With his tuition payments frozen and the morality clause of the educational trust triggered, he was asked to take an indefinite leave. Attempts to appeal were rejected when surveillance photos and payment records confirmed long-standing deception. Meanwhile, Elias was already preparing for his departure. By the following morning, his plane had lifted off from JFK, bound for Dublin. There, his position as Director of Cardiac Research at one of Europe's premier medical centers awaited. His work would continue, only now without the shadow of lies trailing behind him. In his penthouse overlooking the River Liffey, Elias unpacked with quiet purpose. A year ago, he'd begun laying the foundation for a legacy that had nothing to do with the Monroe name and everything to do with medical ethics. The Gilbert Ethics Foundation, launched under a different name to avoid attention, had already begun awarding scholarships. Back in New York, the consequences continued to unfold. News headlines rotated between hospital board resignations and ethical scandals. Dominic was placed on immediate suspension. Vivian's nursing license came under review. The Department of Insurance opened a formal fraud investigation. And in the midst of it all, the 3 children, no longer protected by money or social status, began to experience the weight of their decisions. Sienna, once groomed for a career in cardiology, now found herself locked out of internships. Her name was flagged in HR systems. Even urgent care clinics declined her applications. Mara had to leave Columbia Med after donors withdrew scholarship support. She took a job as a pharmaceutical rep, commuting daily to clinics she once considered beneath her. Nolan returned to New York and enrolled in community college, working evenings at a supply warehouse. His pride remained intact, but the path forward looked nothing like the one Head mocked his father for taking. The press, relentless as ever, eventually tired of the scandal, but its residue remained. The family once seen as untouchable had become a case study in arrogance, betrayal, and downfall. And Elias? He never once gave an interview. He let the facts and the silence speak for him. In his new life, truth was not just a principle. It was a shield, a clean incision from everything false. The surgical metaphor he had once reserved for damaged hearts now applied to his entire existence. Sometimes the only way to heal is to cut away what's diseased, cleanly, decisively, without hesitation. And that's exactly what he'd done. 12 months passed. The city that once knew Elias Monroe as a celebrated surgeon now remembered him as something more. A man who had exposed the rot beneath perfection and walked away untouched. Dublin had embraced him. From the sleek hallways of St. Athanasius Medical Center to the boardrooms of global ethics conferences, Elias had become a name synonymous with precision, progress, and integrity. In his penthouse overlooking the River Liffey, Elias maintained the same discipline that had defined his surgical career. He reviewed research submissions with the same scrutiny as cardiac charts. He trained interns not only in medical technique but in moral clarity. And under his guidance, the Monroe Initiative for Medical Integrity expanded across Europe, sponsoring ethical oversight programs and scholarships for young professionals who refused to compromise. One morning, a news alert pinged on his tablet. Dominic Kellen, once a name paired with prestige, now faced multiple civil lawsuits. The headline showed him leaving a courthouse, haggard and hollow, the glamour long gone. The charges had grown beyond malpractice. Fraud, conspiracy, falsification of public records. The insurance companies that once proudly backed him had abandoned him, and former patients had organized into a unified suit. A second alert followed minutes later. Vivian Hale's nursing license had been officially revoked. After a year of hearings, the board had ruled her complicit in dozens of falsified postoperative files. She had continued to support Dominic's schemes, even forging records under her name. Elias didn't react. Not outwardly. He simply marked both articles and returned to the ethics reports from hospitals in Lisbon and Munich. Yet a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. Not the pleasure of revenge, but the steady calm of justice fulfilled. In New York, the once celebrated Monroe children now lived in a far different world. Sienna, unable to reclaim her place in the medical field, worked nights as a physician's assistant at a small walk-in clinic in Brooklyn. Her engagement to Asher was nothing but a bitter memory. His wedding to a new partner had been covered by the same society column that once celebrated her. Mara, dismissed from Columbia, now traveled the Northeast corridor selling diagnostic equipment to underfunded hospitals. Her resume remained impressive, but her last name worked against her. Every interview ended in polite rejection. Nolan enrolled in community college for the third time. He worked part-time as a hospital orderly, the same job Elias had once done during medical school. His pride had taken the longest to bend, but eventually reality had worn it thin. And still Elias made no contact, but not out of cruelty. He had established a path forward for each of them. The educational trusts, once symbols of privilege, had been restructured into merit-based scholarships. If they chose integrity, they could earn their way back, just not by entitlement. One day, while leaving a surgical demonstration in Boston, Elias noticed a familiar figure in the hallway. A young man in hospital scrubs, pushing a supply cart. It was Nolan. They met eyes briefly. Nolan stopped, uncertain. "Dr. Monroe," he said softly. Elias nodded. "The trust is still active. When you're ready to earn it." Nolan didn't reply immediately, but the understanding passed between them. No rage, no accusation, just quiet recognition of a road not yet closed. Later that night, back in Dublin, Elias received an email. The sender, Nolan. The subject line, "I understand now." Inside, just a sentence. "Every heartbeat has its rhythm. Thank you for never faking yours." Elias stared at the screen for a long time. Then he clicked archive and turned toward the window. Beyond the river, the city lights shimmered like cardiac monitors. Patterns of life, signals of motion, evidence that things, even after catastrophe, could return to order. Sometimes the cleanest hearts come from the deepest cuts. And Elias Monroe had never been more precise. A decade had passed since the wedding that never was, and yet the name Elias Monroe still echoed through corridors of medical institutions worldwide. Not as a scandalized father, but as a reformer who changed how medicine viewed trust. The Monroe Institute for Ethical Medicine had grown into an international force. Its scholarship recipients worked in over 40 countries, often credited with exposing fraud, reforming hospital protocols, and launching integrity initiatives that reshaped healthcare policies. Medical schools taught his case as required reading, not just the betrayal but the choice that followed it. In Dublin, Elias stood before an audience of over 1,000 at Trinity College. His keynote address at the 10th anniversary symposium of his foundation bore a simple title, "Truth as Treatment, Repairing Systems the Way We Repair Hearts." His presence commanded silence. His words, precise, restrained, steady, reminded his listeners that every ethical decision carried ripples far beyond one patient, one procedure, one moment. In the front row, a familiar face sat in quiet reflection. Nolan, now 29, he had earned his nursing license after years of hands-on work. Today, he ran a patient care program in Boston that emphasized dignity in long-term recovery. He no longer asked for trust. He earned it one interaction at a time. That morning, Nolan had been accepted into the Foundation's Advanced Scholarship Program, a first for a former Monroe heir. His personal statement began simply, "I once thought family was defined by genetics. Then I learned it's defined by character." Elias hadn't needed to reply. He had simply added Nolan's name to the alumni roster. Back in New York, the others had faded from prominence. Sienna worked as a shift supervisor at a small health cooperative in Queens. She shared a modest apartment with her husband, a lab technician. She had applied multiple times to higher institutions but was quietly declined. Her social pages now featured her garden, not luxury. And in private moments, she admitted she missed the days when her father still believed in her. Mara traveled less these days. Most clinics knew her name. She had taken a marketing job unrelated to medicine. Though she spoke at the occasional ethics panel, it was clear to audiences that hers was a cautionary tale. Vivian and Dominic, once the architects of a glamorous deception, now lived apart. Their relationship had unraveled slowly and bitterly. Vivian worked as a dental receptionist under her maiden name. Dominic, after years of legal battles, had surrendered his license entirely. Their final asset, a dusty storage unit in Queens, was sold last spring. In a twist of poetic closure, Elias's foundation had acquired a small item for its ethics archive. Dominic's revoked medical license, mailed anonymously with a note. "Let others learn from my failure." Now framed alongside Vivian's nursing certificate and a printed copy of the original wedding invitation. The license was part of a rotating exhibit titled From Collapse to Conscience. School groups, residents, and international visitors toured the collection yearly. That evening, Elias and Dr. Camille Rhodes, now chair of the Foundation's board, hosted a private dinner for symposium speakers. Among them were physicians who had reported internal corruption, whistleblowers from pharmaceutical trials, and students who had risked careers to tell the truth. Camille raised a toast. "To the man who taught us that silence is never neutral." Elias smiled politely but said little. His work wasn't about legacy. It was about replication. He wasn't interested in being remembered. He was interested in building people who wouldn't forget. Later that night, Elias received a short email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "10 years ago." The body simply said, "You did what we couldn't. You cut out the rot and showed us what was left. Some of us are trying to rebuild from that. Thank you." No name. No reply needed. As Dublin's city lights shimmered outside his window, Elias looked out at the skyline, the same view he had chosen when he walked away from everything false. He hadn't destroyed a family. He had revealed its truth. He hadn't ruined reputations. He had exposed what they were built on. And in doing so, he had created something lasting. Not revenge. A legacy, built not on blood, but on choice. On integrity. One decision at a time.